Can you sort Ali's mute? Good morning, everyone. Can everybody hear me?
I've still got everyone showing in the lobby, Billy.
Oh, they're still in the lobby.
You want me to admit them?
Oh, if you could admit them, I thought that when I start a meeting, they would all be in. Oh, admit all. There we go.
Cool, here we go.
Good morning.
I think yes, the website.
Morning.
I think.
Good morning, everybody. If you could please mute your microphones, that would be helpful so there's no feedback.
It was actually probably Lexi's
Right. Muted everybody.
It seems to block out, like she freaks out if there's like a ban or something.
I think I've muted everybody. Hello, can anybody hear me?
Can you find Billy?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Can I just welcome everybody to the question and answer session? And welcome to the session. My name is Billy Nicholl. I'm a team manager in Children's Services, and I'm just here to try and do the technical stuff today in Amy's absence. So if anything goes wrong, it's me to blame. But I hope it's a good session. It will be question and answer towards the end, but we've got some presenters that will start us off. And some questions had been sent in. You got the opportunity to send in questions. And if you can keep your camera on if you ask questions towards the end, but please keep your microphones on mute so we don't get feedback. I'm hearing somebody speaking, but I can't seem to. That's it. Okay, so Ali, are you able to join us?
Billy, sorry, see, just before we get started, can we just ask folk to put their microphone, their cameras on? It's a bit off-putting when it's just a sea of folks'
Could
initials.
you pop your cameras on, please, and maybe put your microphones off? So that would be really helpful, so we're not just seeing grey blobs. That's great, thank you very much. It's quite off-putting if there's no faces to speak to for people. Right, Ali, are you able to speak now?
Good morning, everyone. Yeah. Can everyone hear me now? A few nods, that's great. Well, first of all, I have just decided I am not going to take up a career in stand-up comedy because the stress of being in front of 200 people who you can't really see them all, I can only see the front row as it were, has made me realise that wouldn't be the career for me. But welcome, very warm welcome to everyone for coming along this morning. For those of you I haven't met yet, I'm Ali McAlpine. I'm a lead service manager in children's social work. And I have the pleasure of standing in today for our Child Protection Lead Officer, Amy Anderson, who couldn't be with us. So I'm going to host. This is the first of what we hope will be a series of question and answer webinars in the field of child protection. The reason we've come together today is really in response to an ask to the Child Protection Committee from all agencies across our partnership for more opportunities to really broaden our understanding about particularly the roles and responsibilities of other professionals, as well as allowing some scope for us to tease out together some of the respective challenges that we have in the field of child protection. I don't need to tell this audience today, there's never been a time when our children and families have needed us more. The impact of austerity, cost of living, increasing mental health challenges experienced across the country and globally means that in Aberdeen, no less than we might have expected, these factors have impacted on our children and our families. And unsurprisingly, we see child protection nature referrals flowing into all of our services each and every day. We're also working just now amidst a very fast-paced changing legislative landscape. So our policy and our laws surrounding the work we do have moved quite significantly. Changes brought about by the UNCRC, with the new Care and Justice Act, with our age of criminal responsibility having increased to 12 and likely to increase further. And all these and many other policies are really impacting on how we do what we do and how that's felt by the children that we're serving to protect. I think it's really important to take an opportunity to just do a very quick plug on the Bairnshuis, which is a Scottish Government commitment across the country to make sure that there's Bairnshuis support for every child who suffers abuse or harm, and children that fall under the auspices of the Age of Criminal Responsibility Act, really to make sure that they get the support they need in a much more one-stop shop fashion. In Aberdeen, we have a building that's currently being renovated that's going to be able to support the work carried out by the multitude of professionals supporting children when children have suffered abuse. But although that would be our centre of excellence, that building, our ethos, our approach aspires to be even greater than this. We're really wanting to absolutely tussle with the challenges that mean that we can afford children the protection, physical and emotional and mental health support, recovery, justice, all integrated with us all working as hard as we can, minimising the impacts of children having to retell their stories. So we're here today to appreciate, I guess, that the child protection picture is needing us all to be part of it. We know that child protection is one area that just simply couldn't be tackled by any one agency. Obviously, it's led by social work, it's led by Police Scotland and by NHS colleagues as the key lead agencies, but we recognise that they couldn't do that alone. Probably the agency that knows most of our children best are our education colleagues. They see them day in, day out in the environment of nurseries and schools. And so they're obviously an absolutely invaluable partner. The four key agencies would work together, supported by third sector agencies, but also supported by our children, by our families and the wider communities. And each and every one of us brings together a piece of jigsaw that fits into that child protection picture. And we know that until we've got that full picture, we really don't know what the full situation is. We couldn't determine the risks without that very broad picture that's there. Today's focus is on physical abuse, and that wasn't just pulled out of the hat. The reason that we went for physical abuse is because this is an area that has obviously recently seen some amendments in legislative changes. Equal protection legislation came in a number of years ago, meaning that it was no longer acceptable to use the defence of reasonable chastisement. So previously, where parents could sometimes argue for why their child may have been for want of a better term, suffering assault at their hands because they were managing their behaviour, that was no longer felt to be a reasonable action, and has meant that we've had to have a very careful journey over the past few years to try and make sure that we're protecting children, but that we're not criminalising parents unnecessarily. We're offering scope to educate and inform parents in a proportionate manner so that we see no harm to our children. This topic of physical abuse was also picked because it single-handedly is the most frequently cited concern out of all our child protection concerns. So of all the calls that come into social work services about the care of children, this would be the absolute, the top frequently cited concern. And what's really interesting is that it's not the most frequent concern for coming to a child protection planning meeting. So children that need child protection plans in place, it's not cited as that most common concern. It's also not the factor that leads to the most children's names being placed on the Child Protection Register. So this tells us something really interesting. It tells us that things are happening to children that people are worried about, but not necessarily relying on our full gamut of child protection measures to protect the child from that harm in the future. We know that most children that suffer significant harm, it comes from a parent or carer, and we know that often that child remains in the environment with their parent and carer after the allegation is made. So this again tells us that the experience that the child's had isn't one that necessitates removal from families. It isn't one that we are necessarily going to have a criminal conviction for. So what's really important for us to remember today, and I'm hoping that today's Q&A can help us with, is that we all need to remember that the action we take for children who've suffered physical abuse, or there's allegations of physical abuse, the impact that we have is likely to leave a very lasting impression on them, on each and every family we work with. And to help me over the years, on a personal note, I guess what I have done is force myself to take a minute, just a minute, every day when I hear of these concerns, to place myself in the shoes of those that we're here to protect, and ask myself, if this were me in this situation, if this was my child, are the actions I'm taking justifiable? Are they necessary? Are they proportionate? Are they non-judgmental? Could I understand them if they were being done to me or my children? If so, I have absolute confidence they're the actions that we need to take. And I think that taking yourself out and placing yourself in that position really helps to sharpen up the why, the so what, and probably answers some of the questions that we find tricky in all our professional roles when we're thinking about what to do. I'm really delighted with so many people here today. 200 people at the last count have signed up to join this webinar, and some have already posed questions for us. And to help us answer them, I'm really delighted to be joined by our panel members. I started last night to count up the collective years of experience that the 4 panel members have, but I realised that would probably go down very badly, and I'd have a few of them a little unhappy. I think you'll probably know some of them aren't known for mincing their words. They'll call a spade, but across the 4 agencies, they've a wealth of experience and skill to share. A special plug for DI Ryan Morris, who's actually on leave this week, but has chosen to get up and don his shirt and tie and join us for the webinar today. So I guess that's just tantamount to dedication of the professionals that we have in Aberdeen. I'm just going to briefly introduce the panel. We have Lisa Williams, who's a Quality Improvement Officer, who is our lead across the education world in Aberdeen City for child protection. So really pleased to have Lisa here with us today. We have Angela Maitland, Service Manager in Children's Social Work, who's got responsibility for our what's colloquially known as our front door, our intake service, and elements of our Fit Like Wellbeing Hubs. We've got Dr. Marianne Forrester, Consultant Paediatrician, Lead for Child Protection across NHS Grampian. And as I say, we've got DI Morris, who is Detective Inspector at the Public Protection Unit and the IRD desk. All of these 4 panel members are involved in training. Some of that training's national across the country, so we're really lucky to have them in Aberdeen and going to help us answer our questions today. So I've had a look through the questions that have been posed. I have restricted them, just because of timing, I've restricted them to questions around physical abuse. We hope to get through those questions, and if we've any time, open up to the floor any questions that you might want to bring today. There's some questions that have been posed that we'll probably get back to people after the session today if they've not really been focused on physical abuse. So a number of questions came into us that I guess could be labelled around proportionality. Why is it we do what we do when we do it? How are those decisions taken? So the first question I'm going to ask the panel came from a family support worker who asked, our challenge as a service is that when reporting observations or allegations of physical abuse, we get varied responses from the social work department. Some staff tell us absolutely not to question parents before reporting, and on other occasions we've been asked why we haven't consulted parents before phoning. We'd like some clarity as to what the social work department would like us to do in these situations. I'm wondering if I could start off, Lisa, by coming to yourself, because this was a query that came in from our education colleagues.
Yeah, more than happy to start, Ali, and I know others in the panel will want to chip in with this one. You can all hear me okay, can you? Try and give me a nod. So this is a question that comes up regularly, and I suppose the reason it comes up regularly is because there is no one size that fits all. It can be quite a grey area in that every scenario and every disclosure that's made is quite different. What I would say is that we have talked a lot as a team. As Ali mentioned, the calling a spade factor comes into to being a positive thing when this group of people that's on the panel and others beyond get in a room together and have these discussions about these questions that are arising regularly, and we have lots of debate between ourselves around what our response should be to those sorts of questions. And I think we have got much smarter as a team, a collective multi-agency team, around our messaging with regards to this, in that we are one team, we talk about it regularly, and so we want to make sure that the response isn't sitting solely with social work. And so I suppose from education's perspective, what we have talked about is the fact that actually, as Ali mentioned, we often know the families much better than anyone else. So for us to gather some more information, to do a bit of digging in a really controlled way, and I'll talk a little bit more around that, can be really helpful to get a very clear picture of what the situation is actually like. But sometimes, even when we've done a bit of digging and we've asked some further questions, it's still grey and we're still a bit unsure. So in those instances, I'm always quick to say to our head teachers, and others in other agencies would have their own line managers to consult with, that speak to a quality improvement officer if you need to discuss that further, if there's something that's still feeling a bit uncomfortable with you and you want to discuss that further. But if you need more information about the family, then we would ask you still to contact JCPT. And sometimes from that conversation with our social work colleagues, we then think, actually, we need more information still. So Ali, what I was going to do was drop into the chat here. We've got 2 documents that we've put together that I'm hoping will be helpful. One's just scenarios based. So it's the type of scenarios that come up regularly and what you should expect that response to be from social work and from police. So hopefully that document will help in terms of those conversations. And there's another one that Peter Henry, one of our service managers, helped put together at one point around gathering further information when a disclosure is being made. So I'm going to drop both of those in, Ali, to see if they're helpful. I'll pause there because I know our panel members will want to chip in further while I'm doing that.
Thanks very much, Lisa. Ryan, anything you want to add to?
No, the only thing I would add on to what Lisa has said, and I know I spoke to teachers, social workers and that before, is that please don't think that the ask of getting more information from a child is passing a responsibility on to another agency. We're just trying to ascertain as best we can what has happened to a child in order to do that and have that most proportionate response that Ali was speaking about. And this is absolutely pertinent for physical abuse, because, as you know, our young people use language such as hit, pushed, grabbed, etc. And it's really important that we explore that as much as we can in order to have the most proportionate response. First and foremost for that family, but secondly for ourselves as workers and agencies. A lot of time and effort, and rightfully so, goes into holding of IRDs, etc. And I think we have become a lot better over the last 18 months at essentially triaging and screening, if that's the right way of putting it, as best we can as to what's happened to that young person. So, yeah, we have moved on in terms of asking children more questions, but again, I always use the adage, I've not seen a case that's not been taken up by a fiscal or from SCRA because a teacher, social worker or police officer asked too many questions at the outset. So it's just having that confidence. And like Lisa said, it is about the best placed person to do it. We have had instances where, you know, we've been contacted and the police will put people out on the odd occasion, because I do appreciate that the young person might not have the best relationship with their teachers. But again, like Lisa said, that's all for conversations for us to have amongst each other. Thanks.
Can I just come in again there, Ali, in that just to make really clear, when there's been a disclosure that's clear in terms of, an adult has done something inappropriate towards a child and it's clear, there is absolutely never any expectation to discuss that directly with the parent. And I think that's really important. So whenever there has been a request to have further discussion with adults, it's not when it's clear set. And so and what I've said I think I maybe just said this already, but just to repeat, that when our head teachers are asking me directly about asking further questions to the adults directly, that has to only ever be after discussion with our social work colleagues. So I would expect there to be a call to JCPT to have that further discussion, so that they can put that puzzle pieces together. They will know more about the family, or they'll have more information potentially with regards to police records, etc. So we're not looking for our education staff to have those conversations directly without further discussion with our social work colleagues.
Thank you, Lisa. That's really helpful. I just go back to that. If we were in the shoes, if the police officer comes to our house, checking out that our son John is well and fine because of an allegation that we won't be able to say too much about as we're standing at the front door, the impact on that family is very, very significant. And as a parent, we would all want to feel that was justified, and sometimes it is, but just making sure that we are just really thinking about that in advance seems really helpful. But it probably does, you're right, Lisa, give us times of it's not all black and white, and in social work our world is entirely grey, and there's little bits of circumstances. They are not straightforward, so we have to kind of factor it all in, which makes it particularly tricky. Okay, let's move on.
Can I add, Ali,
of course
sorry.
you can, Angela.
I guess just to come in there in terms of the social work response, it is about gaining a context. You know, we, as Ryan has already mentioned, and Lisa, children say many different things, and it's not about us saying we don't believe them. Of course we do, but it is about gaining a greater context as to what that is about, so that our response is that proportionate response. I absolutely understand that some people feel they don't, they wouldn't want to be questioning a parent or a child, but I guess flipping that on its head, why would you want a stranger coming doing that? Because ultimately a social worker, for instance, speaking to a child is a stranger in the first instance. So it is about gaining that proportionate context and helping us direct which way we're going to go with this. I guess I'd also want to reassure that actually whatever the response is, it's not that social work don't want to know, and we will act upon that appropriately. So I guess I just want to offer some reassurance in terms of that.
Thank you. Okay, we'll move on. This next question, and there was a few questions around this topic. It was about, I guess it's similar to the proportionality. It was about the grounds for different action, when we've got grounds and scope to use different legal measures. The question came from a police officer who's asked, we've been dealing with a family who's been subject to multiple IRDs, and the child continues to remain at home, and I wonder whether where the threshold will lie for the children to be removed from parental care. So I guess that's it's probably a good one to start with yourself, Angela, just to think a little bit about grounds.
Okay, and yes, it is a frequent within IRDs, and a frequent, it does come up, and as anyone who's been to an IRD knows, that actually during an IRD that is one of the considerations that we have. I suppose I would want to stress very strongly that actually the removal of a child, albeit people may think that that is appropriate in terms of them being physically safe, the care review, the promise would actually inform us that actually that's not always proportionate and it's not always the best action to take. So we have to be mindful of that, of course we do. In terms of gaining a child protection order, it's not that simple in terms of we need evidence. We need the whole action of applying for child protection order. It's a legal one, and ultimately it involves a social worker being in front of a sheriff and speaking to that evidence. The evidence can't be hearsay, it can't be worries, it can't be concerns, it has to be evidence. And often we don't have that evidence, which is a frustrating place to be for social work as well. I think often some agencies think that we're going lightly or we're going too soft. But when we're saying, no, we can't go for a child protection order, but what we are saying is, where is the evidence to support us gaining that? You know, we often have sheriffs say, what was the difference between yesterday and today? So the evidence has to be live and happening. We also clearly have other legal measures to consider. You know, we one of what we must do is clearly inquire whether a parent, if it's felt that the children shouldn't remain in the home or remain in parental care, we explore the consent of removing them. So that's what we would call our Section 25. And we also legally have to consider whether those children could go and reside with other family or friends. Again, at times we get some resistance to that from other agencies, but we have to legally consider that could those children be cared for safely within their family network, not necessarily within their parental care, but within their family network. So we need to consider that. Where we haven't got the immediate evidence to apply for child protection order, there is clearly the other option about a referral to SCRAS, which is the children's hearing process, which does take some time, but if there is the evidence, that's something that we would consider. And again, that's one of the options that we look at within an IRD. That's my answer.
Ryan, Lisa, either of you want to?
No, I mean, I probably across the Northeast get a weekly contact from someone within the police who's asking as to why we've left a family at home. And it's just to echo what Angela says, we've not left the family at home because we don't recognise risk, etc. But we need to look at, again, and I know we'll speak a bit more about proportionality, but if we've left a child at home overnight pending IRD, really we've got no grounds the day after to say, unless there was some startling new information came to light, that we should be removing that family and keeping this relevant to physical abuse. And Ali, you'd raised about, you know, proportionality response and how I guess we would feel as families, etc. Should we actually be removing a child from home and placing that extra trauma on them? The promise, UNCRC, etc. all says no, we shouldn't, and we need to be proportionate about it. We need to be realistic about it as well, that maybe 10 years ago when we as a police would have knocked on a family's door and said to dad, and okay, I'm maybe stereotyping here, but dad, you've alleged to have hit your child, can you please move out and go somewhere else? Families would have done that 10 years ago, but they know what their rights are, they know what our powers are these days. And like Angela said, we have to, if we're going to be asking families to do things, we need to be able to have the legal grounds and the legislation to back that up. And the simple, whether I guess we like it or not, and not to sound too blunt about it, we're not going to get a CPO because one of my daughters said that I've, you know, maybe assaulted them at a lower end of the scale. And I think the only thing I would add to that is, I guess that a bit of understanding of roles, etc. when we're in IRDs isn't really kind of place that at social work's door and say, well, you know, we disagree that they shouldn't be there. The safety planning, etc. around children being at home is all of our responsibilities. And, you know, we are seeing improvements within IRDs, I guess, of people. It's too easy to just disagree, I guess, and say, well, I think they shouldn't be at home. So hopefully, you know, Angela's answer there in terms of the threshold for CPOs will just give us a bit of insight to be able to say, right, okay, we're not maybe entirely comfortable with it at home, but what support and planning can be put in place? So for example, you know, almost like trigger plans. If they're not at school tomorrow morning, what we're going to do is out of our social work going to make a phone call. Is there a health visitor in the house there tomorrow? Do the police need to go down and speak to mum and dad? So there's always things that we can look to do. And whilst it might not sit comfortably with us, because that's not what we would have done 5 to 10 years ago, I guess there just needs to be an acceptance of, well, that's just not the world that we live in today.
Thank you, Ryan. Ryan, it was just making me think there of the fact that it's been well sort of researched that we would remove children and make them physically safer, but not loved. We might place them with very loving foster parents, but the child doesn't necessarily feel the love, that kind of family love that is around in most of our families, including the most vulnerable families we work with. And we may be replacing physical safety, but losing something really very important, the power of that family love. And we also know that these children, even children who have suffered sometimes fairly substantial abuse at the hands of parents, generally continue to have relationships with them that are far more reaching and long lasting than their professional relationships. So I guess that makes it all the more important. That's not to say it's safe to leave them all in parents' care, but it certainly is to say we need to be really mindful that whatever we do should try to cause no more harm, should try to make that path that moves forward for that child and family a little bit better than it was before we went in. And sometimes we appreciate as professionals our actions haven't actually done that. They've stirred the hornet's nest and made it less good. And in social work, we have a bit of a privilege because our job is we are agents of social change. We appreciate families can move more positively, but the impact of what we do can influence that. So I think we would all want to.
I think, Ali, sorry,
on that.
I'm just the only thing I'd want to add to that is, and I guess Anja touched on it. In no way, shape, or form would we as an agency be advocating, and nor would social work, education, or health, or any third sector for that matter, that we were leaving a child at home in an absolute unsafe environment. And again, it's just obviously we're doing this webinar on the basis of physical abuse. We know that's 50% of our day business. We know that the majority of those cases for physical abuse are, what we would deem as a lower end of the scale. We know it's not a lower end of the scale for a child and their family that's involved, but I guess that's the discussions that we just need to collectively, I guess, take our concerns in ongoing risks to IRDs, to meetings, and I guess just stand behind our decision making. And if someone really does feel that strongly about someone being left there that is unsafe, then yes, we have escalation policies within our agencies, but thankfully that's something that we very, very rarely need to use.
Thank you. I'm watching our time, so I'm going to move us on, although it's still around the issue of context and proportionality. One of our deputy head teachers has asked us, it's often difficult to be able to support young people who have significant additional support needs through a disclosure element. We will report bruising and the utterings that the child has made to the JCPT, who will then want us to try and get more information from the child or young person, but cognitively they're unable to do this. They're also unable to represent themselves in joint interviews in a way that allows them to tell what's happened. It feels like our most vulnerable young people are not being heard. So I think in the light of what I was saying about Bearnshoes, it's really an interesting question of how we get the true voice of children where they've got additional challenges. Angela, do you want to start off just answering this one?
Yeah, so I can get my mic off there. Absolutely. Absolutely hear that and the concern that's been shared there. What I would say, and I wave the flag for, we in the North East, including Aberdeen City, have introduced the Scottish Child Interview Model, so SCIM. We love an acronym, don't we, in social work? So we have SCIM, which is a joint social work, police interview, trauma-informed interview process that was commenced a couple of years ago. And I guess what I'd want to reassure people with, and I was doing a wee bit of my homework as well, that our first annual review showed that 13% of those interviewed had an identified learning and physical disability need. So, and I know that may seem a small number, but I guess I would say probably with our previous model, our 5-day GI, we weren't able to even reach those very vulnerable young people. So I am hopeful. It's certainly an area in which we're continuing to improve in. The whole point of the SCIM model is trauma informed, is the best evidence achieved through robust planning and interviewing. And that robust planning involves, we use agencies such as SALT, so speech and language therapy, education, clearly again banging that drum that, you know, those who know these vulnerable children best is often the teacher, the head teacher. So the whole point of SCIM is to do that planning in which we can actually hopefully elicit some kind of evidence from that child. So it's just because they have a cognitive impairment or learning disability does not preclude them from being able to give evidence, and we will try our hardest to get that from them. So I would want to kind of reassure people that please let us know. I guess going back to the JCPT wants us to gather some more context. You know, of course we do, and I guess that's to help us to inform also on the basis, does this fit the IRD, significant harm level, etc. So I'm going to welcome in Ryan, because Ryan was there at the birth of SCIM, so he probably knows more about it than I. So anything to add, Ryan?
No, we've come a long way in respect of our default position shouldn't be like before. We used to, you know, sit in multi-agency meetings and someone say, oh, well, you'll not be able to GI Ryan Morris. The default position should always be that we're going to look to interview a child now, and our SCIM interviewers do a power of work in terms of planning, and really it withstands robust scrutiny if we aren't going to interview that child. And I guess the only bit I'd add to, and maybe I'll pass on to Marianne in respect of kind of injuries, etc. for young people that perhaps aren't able to articulate what's happened, is that if you've got a young person who is vulnerable, then that would be within the risks that we look at when we're deciding to go to an IRD, and would be more likely perhaps to say, so whilst we might not be able to get that context from the young person, that's just an additional risk that we would have to look at and come to a multi-agency decision as to whether we would hold that meeting or not. Still a bit to go with it, but I think we are getting a lot better at being able to give young people a voice. We've had GIs with the use of storyboards recently in the Northeast. Okay, yeah, a lot of planning goes into that, but rightfully so. So we are getting better, but recognise a wee bit of work to do, and I'm sure that's something that will evolve as the Bairns House conversations continue to move on.
Yeah, thank you, Ryan. I was going to come in. I think these are one of the fairly exclusive circumstances that we would want to offer a medical assessment for a child where they are really not able to represent themselves. So that decision at IRD, where we have our teacher colleagues around the table who are able to tell us this wee one will not be able to have an interview, then bringing them up to the hospital, or in Bairns House when we have it available, or even we have sometimes gone out to schools such as Orchard Brae to assess that injury to see if that helps us understand what has happened. So yeah, thanks.
Thanks very much. I'm going to move us on. I'm watching the time just ticking along. The next few questions were around medical examinations and in particular skeletal surveys. Marianne, I'll read out for you. The query was, a specialist nurse was interested in this question. When an infant or child has a skeletal or other type of scan to identify if they have an injury, does it always have to be repeated to confirm the diagnosis? And also, why are medicals 2 weeks apart? Can you give us a bit of a flavour of that, please?
Thanks, Ali. I'm just going to focus on skeletal surveys because that's the simplest thing. And I think this is a really good question. So thanks for the opportunity, because it does, it poses quite a lot of difficulty for us multi-agency teams trying to safety plan when we have this 2-week break. But what I would say is it's really important that you realise that it's not that we're repeating the skeletal survey. The skeletal survey is a 2-part investigation. It's not, it can't be just one. And the reason for that is that those second set of images are actually different images, and they are looking for something very specific. So when a child first presents to us and they have an injury, it may be that we cannot see that on the x-rays until there starts to be healing of the bones. And that healing roughly starts at a sort of 10-day point after your initial injury. And I'm very specifically talking about rib fractures. So the first set of images is basically every single bone in the body is x-rayed. The second set, and remember it's not complete until I do the second set, is just the ribs and looking for any other areas that the radiologist has noted to be of concern. So they might say there may be a metaphyseal fracture at the right wrist, and they will look at that again at that second sort of set of images. This is a totally evidence-based practice. Lots of research has gone into this. It is black and white. There is really no leeway at all. Everybody that's around that child has to hold that risk in those 2 weeks. And again, that is a decision and discussion maybe at reconvened IRD, where we say, you know, what level of certainty do we have that this child has been physically abused? But it is not until we have got those x-rays 2 weeks later that we can actually say for certain that there are no fractures or that there are definitely fractures. And rib fractures in particular are highly suggestive of physical abuse. So they very, very rarely happen accidentally. So that's skeletal surveys, and it's a horrible thing to be holding, and it is really, really difficult. And back to what Angela and Ryan said, it's not about social work's safety plan. It is about everybody's around that child's safety plan, and we're all waiting for pieces of information to support that investigation.
That's really interesting, because I guess while we hold that horrible uncertainty about risk, there's a family involved here. There's a family who potentially have caused no harm whatsoever to their child, or may have caused significant harm. And that's quite a difference, isn't it? And how to hold them through, and it particularly given that a number of the families that we are working with are already totally disadvantaged and vulnerable in other rights. So really tricky. Marianne, before then, another question that's thinking about medical examinations. One of the queries was, somebody's asked why we don't just medically examine every child that says they've been physically assaulted. So surely that would just give us something really clear from medics. Tell us why we don't do that.
Yeah, I guess so. I think, again, it's about team workings into the IRD. It's the IRD that make the decision of whether we do a medical examination. There are sometimes rare occasions that we can't get to IRD before we make that decision. And that's usually two things that are really, really important in the decision. It's, does the child need medical treatment, you know, or is there a forensic need to see that child quite quickly? But in essence, when we're round the table deciding about examination, it has to be all about, does it benefit that child? And the benefit can be a clinical benefit. So it can be that somebody's telling me that they do need to come to A&E and get a cast for a fracture, but that's quite unusual. I'm not going to speak about neglect and why we do neglect medicals, but they are often also lead in to treatment for children and unmet health needs. But any opportunity has to be seen as, will this child clinically benefit from it? But the other benefit for the child is the child going to be safer if I do a medical assessment? And that's a little bit more nuanced. So it's about, and when I'm in IRDs, I'm quite often asking teaching staff, can you give me a really good description of this bruise so that I can work through my evidence based on the likelihood of whether I'm going to be able to say, yes, that's a physical abuse, or no, this is not physical abuse. And it's very rarely black and white like that, but there are some clues that will help me. So that assessment's quite complicated. There are lots of other reasons to do medical examinations. Children might want the medical examination. They might not want the examination. So that's going to decide if a 15-year-old who says that they've been punched by their father says, but I don't want examined, I'm not going to examine them. So there's lots of different parts of the assessment. forensic need, safety planning, does the injury have hallmarks of abuse, etc., etc. And of course, you're getting different people around the table each time at IRD who might have different ideas about whether they're really going to add anything or not. And that's when I think it's really helpful that we all support in making that decision, and it's not just one person. So I feel it's exactly the same as safety planning. Do we or don't we go to medical assessment? I will absolutely hear from the head teacher what they think, what social work think, and what police think.
Thank you very much, Marianne. We move on to some questions now that have come in around cultural differences. Ali Smith, one of our deputy head teachers in Aberdeen, has asked about the issue of how we handle cultural differences. His specific question was, or she, sorry, I don't know, Ali, we often find first cases of physical abuse in families joining our school being attributed to cultural differences. And the question was really about advice for schools and how that could maybe be addressed before it happens, whilst children are under their care. Lisa, I wonder whether some of this is covered in a bit of kind of our training thinking. So do you want to come in first?
Totally. There's two elements there, Ali. One was to say that I'd mentioned documents earlier that we're going to pop into the chat, and unfortunately it's not letting us do that because of the way the webinar's set up today, but we'll send them out after the call. Billy's got to work out how to do that after the call. But a third document that I was going to mention was in relation to this, which is information for families living in Scotland. And there's a pack that's been created from our family learning team that answers those questions around, and our suggestion would be that that pack is used as part of an induction process. So when a new family is coming to the school, I would be offering this pack to all of the families coming to the school. So that's one that can almost be and sharing that information from the earliest possible point. What I've also suggested to some schools that come across this regularly because of the context of their school is just having information sharing evenings or afternoon sessions with families that explain the process, be transparent around if a child makes this disclosure, this is what will happen because this is what has to happen, this is our policy. So whether that's an information sharing event or through newsletters, etc., that you're sending out to families, just be transparent and clear with this is our policy and this is what our process will be if this disclosure is made. So that's one part of it. The other part, Ali, you mentioned there was training. So we're always looking at our training programme as a CPC across all agencies across Aberdeen. But one of the things we've talked about recently is, as well as the annual child protection training that would cover some of these elements, is to have a more focused training opportunity for child protection coordinators. And we also wondered about linking in with some of our other agencies, that could come to be part of that. So there will be something that will come out in the near future around that training session, which really will be an opportunity to have more dialogue and more scenarios-based questions around this sort of thing. So our thoughts, we're at the early stages of planning that, but we're hoping to offer something that will become almost every second year that we open up to, like I say, child protection coordinators or those that are more involved in that in the day-to-day.
Thanks very much. I think the cultural issues increasingly challenged us all, I guess, because we would all, and everyone in this meeting would be really clear, no child should suffer abuse, and everyone would have some quite common view on what would constitute abuse. But in amongst that, we all do just have different priorities, different beliefs. And what's really important is that bit we were talking about earlier of how to make things safer in the future. And we know that out of all of our parents, and that doesn't matter what colour, creed, race they are, our parents mostly love their children very much and want them to do well and want them to be happy. And there's actually evidence-wise quite a small percentage, very small in fact, that would intend to harm their children. So anything we can do that helps to educate about the wider risks that are around for children and about the impact of physical abuse alongside a lot of other types of abuse that maybe go a little bit more unseen than physical physical abuse, like emotional abuse, it's all harm, and anything we can do to make that more positive for our children is really, really important. Okay, Lisa, the training materials, I'm seeing some other questions here that were all about the role of the child protection coordinators in schools and the supports offered to them. And I guess that's covered in your training. Is there anything further you want to add about how we can build up confidence with in all areas?
I suppose it's just, you know, we're trying to get smarter at sharing our resources across all agencies. So when we're creating training packages, we're getting better at sharing them across so that all agencies can benefit from them. So that's going to continue. But as I mentioned already, the child protection coordinator training that'll be more focused. Our initial thoughts was it was one of the school nurses, I think, had asked a question around training. I think it makes absolute sense to have school nurses and potentially health visitors involved in the child protection coordinator training sessions that are face-to-face, but I'm happy to be guided by the full multi-agency group around who we should offer that to, and obviously, as always, if successful, we'll roll it out further.
Ali, can I just come in a second, just to go back on in relation to the cultural differences and maybe just an opportunity for us, I guess, as a police to cover a little bit about proportionality, if that's okay, because that's been mentioned a few times today. If a child says they've been, so moving on from, there was a question earlier on about getting context from a child. So once we've got a bit of context from the child, if a child says they've been assaulted, regardless of what that looks like, a crime has been committed. And I guess for us as the police, you can't tell the police that a crime has been committed and not, you know, and expect that, I guess, a single agency response to that, because, you know, there's a crime there. And essentially for us in the police, and where this is relevant to families not from the UK, equal protection is our discretion in how to deal with that. So we've done a lot of work over the last year with Angela's team in the city about not pushing the boundaries on equal protection, but actually just not being too black and white about it. We as a police, for those that aren't aware, have got a very set list of criteria for something that's going to fit into equal protection, i.e. no domestic abuse convictions, to do with injuries, etc. So there was a time when in the Northeast, if a child had said they'd been hit to the head or with an implement, we would have said, well, that's not chastisement. Well, there actually isn't anything in our guidance says it can't be to the head. It's all about the context around that. So we do make good use of equal protection. I think that is working a lot better than it used to. And that is our discretion in the police for dealing with a child that says that they've been assaulted. But in terms of the proportionality of the response, and I think for a lot of families not from the UK, if it doesn't fit into equal protection, then yes, we're going to be having an IRD. And I always like, you know, not to coin Angela's phrase of, you know, there's a time where it can be viewed that we're using a hammer to crack a nut in respect of what it is that we're dealing with here for a family. So we've got a set process. If it doesn't fit into equal protection, then it's going to be an assault. There's going to be an IRD, and there's likely going to be JIs of families. Now, that's a process that we have to work within, and rightfully so. But what we as a police, I'm hoping that we can, you know, and we are starting to do better in is how proportionately we're dealing with that family. So if you've got two siblings that both said that they've been assaulted by their parents, then there's a corroboration of evidence there. We don't have that in our gift, rightly or wrongly, and we'll not get into that debate just now, but we don't have that in our gift to say we are not going to report that family. We're not going to be charging people in relation to that. But what we do have in our gift is how we do it. Okay, do we need to be arresting a mother or a father and taking them down to Katie Brewster and booking them in when we've got corroborative evidence for something that is, again, lower tariff, unlikely to be taken up by the fiscal? So again, we don't have that in our gift to say that's unlikely to be taken up, so we're not going to report it. But we do have a means of proportionately reporting it. So for example, let's just go out to the house and let's just tell mum or dad that a report's going to be going in. Let's be transparent with them. We've already left the child there, so we're not going to be seeking conditions that mum or dad can't have access to the child. So I know our response frustrates sometimes. I get that. We are a black and white agency, and I know we work in the grey, but we are a black and white agency in respect of if a crime has been committed. But we are getting better, and we'll continue to try to get better as to how we proportionately deal with that, because it's not lost on us. One of the common, not complaints, but things I get challenged at from Angela or her peers, or is in terms of the time taking because of the safety planning. So what we are doing within the police is that if we have displaced someone within a family, then that should be treated as an absolute priority. And for a quicker response. But like every other agency, we are under a lot of pressure in terms of resourcing. And I think the one thing, finally, I'll just finish up on families not from the UK, that again, that we should be discussing at IRDs and making sure we are having timely responses as to this is they don't have the support package around them that other families from here will have. We've had stories of, a dad not being at work for a week because he was the one who was going to be, implementing a safety plan. And actually you look back on it and say, we absolutely have to safeguard a child first and foremost, but really we shouldn't be looking back on it saying, have we made this worse for this family? And I think if we have done, we need to question how we've went about it. That would be my only kind of plea in relation to that.
Thank you very much. Thank you to everyone for coming to listen to our Q&A session today. I'm not going to open up questions to the floor because literally we have a few minutes and it will just close down on people as their mid-question. But I guess I would like to end on a positive, and that positive is that we are incredibly lucky in Aberdeen City. We have got a very, very skilled, experienced partnership that works together in the protection of our children. I have the pleasure of sitting on some national groups who talk about Aberdeen in the northeast as a place that manages very well the issue of significant harm, and I'm really, really proud of that. I know we all are. I don't think we should lose sight of that. One question that somebody had asked was about resources and whether that would impact on our work. I would want to say categorically our response to child protection concerns is what we feel it should be. We will always respond where children are in danger, and we will want to take collective action together to make sure that things are safer. And for cases that are not black and white, we will want to tussle that out and make sure we do what's right, despite the challenges, alongside the challenges of resourcing that's squeezed for all of us. We will continue to want to do that. So I just want people to hear that, because I think that it's down to each and every one of you and your colleagues that we're able to do what we are able to do today. But any other questions will for future events, we'd be really welcoming them coming in. And just finally, thanks to our 4 panel for taking the time today to answer questions, and to you all for coming along. Thank you.
Thank you.